Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club for the presentation of the 27th Annual Gerald R. Ford Journalism Prizes for distinguished reporting on the Presidency and on national defense. I'm Myron Belkine, a former International Bureau Chief for the Associated Press and the 107th President of the National Press Club. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organizations for journalists, and the club is honored to be the venue for this year's awards presentation, as it has been since the first awards were given in 1988. The two prizes being conferred today are sponsored by the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan corporation whose programs are supported entirely by contributions and bequests in an effort to honor President Ford's sustained commitment to public service. President Ford personally attended the awards presentations while he was alive, and longtime members and staff of the National Press Club still recall how proud he was to come to the club and witness journalists being honored for excellence. You might want to take a few minutes later today to view some of the photos of the awards ceremonies, which are on display on the opposite corner from this room, including one of President Ford taken on July 17, 2003, when he presented the Gerald R. Ford Awards to Bob Woodward and Dan Balls of the Washington Post. Today, we are honored to have two prize winners being honored today. Glenn Thrush, senior writer for Politico magazine, who was winner of the Gerald R. Ford Prize for distinguished reporting on the Presidency, and David Phillips of the Gazette in Colorado Springs, who was winner of the Gerald R. Ford Prize for distinguished reporting on national defense. We are also honored to have the distinguished and award-winning CBS correspondent Bob Schieffer as our guest speaker. Bob, among his many awards, was the 2010 recipient of the Fourth Estate Award, the highest honor conferred by the National Press Club for a lifetime of achievement in our profession. And we are honored to have members of the board of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation with us today. I would like to introduce the head table, and I would ask that you hold your applause until I ask each of them to stand briefly as I call their names. From your far right, Angela Greiling-King, White House reporter for Bloomberg News and the 2013 National Press Club president. Tommy Burr, Salt Lake Tribune, and treasurer of the National Press Club. Glenn Thrush, the distinguished presidential reporting winner of Politico. Stephen Ford, chairman of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. Bob Schieffer, CBS News. Skipping over the podium. Joe Calvaruso, executive director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. David Phillips, the distinguished defense reporting winner of the Gazette in Colorado Springs. Pat Host of Defense Daily and an NPC member. And Gil Klein, a journalism professor at American University, the 1994 president of the National Press Club, and who during the club's centennial year made presentations around the country about the club, including at the Gerald Ford Library in Ann Arbor. Representing the Ford family today is Stephen Ford, a son of former President and Mrs. Ford. He was an actor for more than 25 years, appearing in more than 800 hours of film and television productions. Before becoming an actor, he worked on the professional rodeo circuit as a team roper and still ropes in his spare time, I believe. Today, he is a motivational speaker related to his experiences during his family's stay in the White House and his years in Hollywood. He also has another important role as chairman of the Gerald R. Ford Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a National Press Club welcome to Stephen Ford, who will make the award presentations.
I had to flash back on that intro there. When Dad was president, I went out west and I started cowboying and rodeoing, and I took my 10 Secret Service agents with me. And it was like that Billy Crystal movie, City Slickers. Yeah, there you go. We took off their coats and ties and put cowboy hats and boots on them, and aren't you glad to know how your government tax dollars were being spent back then? So, no, I was talking to Glenn, one of our winners, and I was telling him I was 18 years old when Dad became president. And when we moved into the White House, I had just graduated from high school. And the other day I walked by, yesterday, Joe, we went out and took some pictures in front of the White House, and I was pointing to Joe. That's where I used to live, up in the corner there. But it reminded me of the first night we moved in to the White House. Again, you got to remember, I was 18 years old. I called up my best friend from high school, grade school, a guy named Kevin Kennedy. I said, you got to come over here. This place is incredible. And so he came over, and here's two 18-year-olds, right? And I take them up to the third floor. The kids lived on the third floor. Mom and Dad were on the second floor. And we go up through the solarium out into the roof of the White House, and you could not do that today because there was nobody up there then, but because of terrorism and things like that, you know, they've got people up there now dressed in black ops and all kinds of weapons that I'm not familiar with. But in 1974, we could go up there, and Kevin and I carried my stereo. Now, stereos were big in 1974. Took several trips. And we carried this big stereo up into the roof of the White House, and here are two 18-year-old kids up there. And we were playing Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. And the White House got a call the next day, people walking by. This was at, midnight, and it's like Dumb and Dumber on the roof of the White House. And somebody got a call the next day, we thought we heard Led Zeppelin coming from the roof of the White House. So that I'm reminded of those stories every time I come back. I'm honored to be up here. Again, the kids, Susan, Mike, and I, we just try to fill Mom and Dad's shoes. It can't be done. Everybody plays a role, and we're very grateful to be here. I thank my trustees from the foundation for being here. A lot of them are out in the audience, and I thank the judges the most for the work they did to find these winners up here. There are a lot of great submissions. So I want to start with the first winner, and this is for our award on reporting on the presidency. And you all know as the modern presidential administrations become ever more sophisticated in controlling their desired message, the job of reporting on government has become correspondingly more difficult, with reporters often funneled into well-rehearsed official spokespersons and denied access to candid exchanges with responsible public officials and staffers. The public depends increasingly for accurate information on industrious, persistent, and credible reporters who can somehow get around and beyond the barriers that are thrown in their way. Glenn Thrush, the first senior staff writer at Politico magazine, distinguished himself during 2013 for his ability to surmount those barriers. Thrush, who wrote a first-rate behind-the-scenes book on the Obama presidential campaign in 2012, reset his sights inside the Obama administration during the critical first year of its second term. His reporting regularly produced insights available nowhere else. Throughout the year, Thrush showed a rare ability to cultivate unique, candid, inside sources, both on and off the record, persuading them to share information that often belied the official storyline. As such, he repeatedly delivered to his readers a unique, colorful, and often unvarnished account of government decision-making. During a difficult year for the administration, Thrush contributed insightful behind-the-scenes reporting on the political struggles of Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, also on the White House staff's attempts to maintain relevance as lame duck status loomed for the president, and on the unusual decision to bring in senior strategic help from beyond the president's inner circle. Thrush's most detailed piece, called Locked in the Cabinet, documented the continual trend towards acquiring power and policy supremacy in the White House at the expense of cabinet members nominally in charge despite repeated promises to reverse that trend. Using vivid anecdotes and colorful detail, Thrush conveys the frustration generated by setbacks such as Obamacare website rollout and the resulting infighting between little-known but powerful political staffers at the White House and their department colleagues. His reporting added vivid and vital context and detail to the public's ability to understand the inner workings of the federal government. In his work product, Glenn Thrush demonstrated the very best qualities of a free press, including resourcefulness, energy, independence, empathy, and a strong sense of history. His work makes him the most deserving recipient of the 2013 Gerald R. Prize for Distinguished Reporting on the Presidency. Would you please join me up here?
Thank you very much. This is could be a little dangerous, so I don't want to fling an arm out. I just can't get the image of Steve on top of the White House listening to Zeppelin. I don't think I would have chosen Stairway to Heaven, but that's just a matter of my personal taste. I want to start by thanking Steve Ford and the officers of the Foundation for this award, which reminds us that governing is not just the thing that we do between campaigns. Ask any veteran now trapped on the waiting list at the VA if they think competent, attentive administration of the government matters, and I think you know what the answer would be to that question. I see so many of my friends and at least one of my employers on the list of past winners. It's an honor to be included among such distinguished company, and I'd like to congratulate Dave Phillips on his much-deserved award. It's also great to see my friends from the Press Club here and to share the stage with the wonderful Bob Schieffer, who is just totally cool. I particularly want to thank all the prize judges for validating my decision to go from the day-to-day coverage of the White House and presidential campaigns, which as you all know is the bread and butter of Politico, to long-form journalism at our new magazine. At least one of my bosses, John Harris, by the way, he was the winner of the Gerald Ford Prize in the year 2000, has from time to time dropped by my desk in the newsroom to remind me ever so gently that I used to write 20 or 30 stories in the 8 weeks it typically takes me now to write one story. So this prize should keep him off my back a while. And for that, Steve, I am eternally grateful. But seriously, I want to thank John and his partner Jim Vandehei, the co-founder of Politico, for creating a workplace that deeply values reporting and provides writers like myself with the freedom, support, and good vibes that we need to thrive. John Harris once got angry at me, and I am not making this up, for not having enough fun. Speaking of fun, a little over a year ago, John called me into his office and told me we were going to hire Susan Glasser, the gifted and driven visionary who had done such memorable work at the Washington Post and Foreign Policy magazine. I had been told she was brilliant and demanding. What people didn't tell me was how much she could elevate my own work. This award would not have been possible without Susan's help and the assistance of the magazine's amazing staff, Blake Hounshell, Elizabeth Ralph, Margie Slattery, and Janet Michaud. Probably the best part of getting this award today is being able to spring my sons, Nathaniel and Charles, from school and forcing them to wear long pants in June. Natty and Charlie, you should know, are both authors in their own right. Each has written several books of highly imaginative fiction. They are, in fact, the only two kids I know who fight over the computer to see who gets to use Word. Their editor and mine is Diane Weber, my lovely and talented wife, who is sitting with them. We met in a newsroom 24 years ago, and we've been working on our stories together at the dining room table ever since. I only hope I have given her half the love, inspiration, and good advice she has given me over the years. Lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about my parents, Carol and Richard Thrush, who aren't around to see their son receive this recognition. Neither one of them were lucky enough to go to college. Neither had the money to take a real vacation. Neither of them ever wrote a word that appeared in print, but they have both set an example that I follow in my work. My mother, who died 26 years ago this month, before I had published a single byline, had an almost supernatural ability to understand people, to put anyone at ease. Within minutes of meeting her, complete strangers, and I'm talking bank clerks, waitresses, teachers, would stop what they were doing and tell her their life stories. Her ears were always open. She would have made a terrific reporter. My father, Richard, who died on Election Day in 2010, was a watchmaker by trade, a mechanical genius, and someone with an unquenchable curiosity for figuring out what made things tick. When I was a kid, we'd literally drive around the neighborhood and pick up stuff people had thrown out. Busted TVs, broken radios, vacuum cleaners, abused toys, and he'd patiently pull them apart, figure out what had gone wrong, put them back together, and coax them back to life. The best journalism, it occurs to me, does exactly the same thing. Thank you.
Well, it is now my honor to award our second recipient. In this past year, there was extremely exceptional strong submissions for the defense reporting. And our judges, and many of them are in the room this afternoon, have selected Dave Phillips from the Gazette of Colorado Springs as the winner of the Gerald R. Ford Award for Distinguished Reporting on National Defense in 2013. President Abraham Lincoln, in his second inaugural address in 1865, admonished the nation to, quote, care for him who shall have borne the battle, end quote. That statement forged a social compact with America's servicemen and women that has lasted over 150 years. Mr. Phillips' series of articles documented a breach of that commitment with the surge in other than honorable discharges by the U.S. Army for warriors whose wounds may not have always physically been evident to people who knew them. Basically, they stripped them of all VA benefits for life. The factual scientific evidence on long-term deterioration of cognitive functions after traumatic brain injuries was very compelling. His stories were local, but the breadth of his research and interviews was national in scope. His writing style, and I just so enjoyed reading the articles, it really was riveting in what it reported. In the shadow of the Air Force Academy and Fort Carson, Mr. Phillips' stories took courage to write and publish. His body of work raised important underlying issues. First, he noted that the military system had not adjusted to the new operational reality in which career troops were often warfighter and veteran at the same time. Second, his work highlighted the disparity between the rhetoric of honoring our wounded warriors and the broken promises of that actual care. This is a problem that budgetary pressures will continue to exacerbate. Finally, his series underscored the increasingly important role that regional news, local news, has when they are working and helping to showcase issues of national importance. The power of his reporting was immediate, had great impact on the national dialogue and the lives of many wounded warriors. The number of soldiers Army-wide who were released with other than honorable discharges began to drop after the series was published. This was, and the judges would tell you if they're all up here, was a unanimous selection by the judging panel to choose David Phillips from the Gazette of Colorado Springs.
Thank you. Thank you to the foundation and to all of you. And whenever you do sustained in-depth reporting, you rely on a lot of people, even though ultimately it's just a one byline thing. My photographer, Michael Siaglo, is here in the back, and we worked together for months. So thank you, Michael, for doing what you do. So it's funny to get an award like this in DC because my reporting is all very un-DC. I talk to privates and specialists and sergeants and people who've never been here and people who don't know the people that make the policies that shape their lives. And I see how those policies actually play out on the ground. And what we found is that soldiers that should have by any measure been taken care of were instead sitting in jail or homeless, stripped of their benefits, even though you could look at their records and see that they'd been blown up twice in Iraq. And so we tried to do something about it, and I knew that the power of these stories would do that. I'll tell you something, though, because I know there's a lot of journalists in the room, and you'll like this. So the other submission that we put in for the Ford prizes was an expose we did on the Air Force Academy, which decided that they were going to catch cadets for breaking the rules by creating a system of undercover informant cadets to snitch on each other. Which is great and probably was effective, except that one of the first things they teach all cadets is, like, you will never lie, ever. And so they had these two things that were incongruous. And we reported about that. And we reported that not only were those two things a contradiction, but oftentimes when these informants were somehow discovered, had their cover blown, the Office of Special Investigations, which was running this whole program, said, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't know who this kid is. He's making stuff up. You should kick him out for whatever he just got caught doing. And so those cadets were kicked out. And so I don't know if you could tell, but I was about to get weepy about the power of journalism because we made a huge difference in people's lives who I will never meet on our Army reporting. And we made no difference at all. We made no difference at all with the Air Force. They essentially, we blew this all out there. We had secret documents people had given to us. We had text messages showing that they were in communication with students, everything. And the Air Force essentially said, this isn't happening. And the people that were thrown out for doing what the Air Force asked them to do are still thrown out. So we keep going. And we appreciate your thanks and your gratitude and your recognition. And we hope that we make a difference sometimes and are happy when we do. And sometimes we don't, and then we go on to the next story. So thank you very much to all of you, and thank you to the foundation.
Thank you very much. It's my great honor right now to introduce the wonderful person I had a chance to sit next to at lunch. And Bob Schieffer came up. We had a celebration in Grand Rapids for Dad's 100th birthday, and it was fascinating. He came up and was part of a panel we had to look back and what that was like back in 1974, 75, 76 when Dad took over the reins of this country. And you weren't sitting at the lead anchor desk in 1974, were you? No. Yeah. Well, it's my honor to introduce Bob Schieffer. 2014, it tells me here, marks Mr. Schieffer's 57th year as a reporter. In his 45th year at CBS, you're one of the few broadcasters, print or print media or journalists, broadcast journalists, who have covered all four major beats, the nation's capital. You covered the White House, you covered the Pentagon, State Department, Capitol Hill. He's been a principal anchor at CBS News since 1973. You anchored the CBS Evening News. You are the man from Face the Nation, the Sunday public affairs broadcast since 1991. You're the chief correspondent here in Washington. And my favorite thing about you is you're a good old boy from Texas. And I hope you will tell the story about your first, well, when Dad became president, you were in the White House pool there, and you know the story I'm talking about and what your first experience was. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Schieffer.
Thank you all. You know, this really is a labor of love when I was asked to come and talk to you all, because Gerald Ford was responsible for some of the very best times in my life when I was the White House correspondent, when he was there. Glenn was talking about his boss called him in one time and said, "You're not having enough fun." That is my view of what journalism is all about. If you can't have fun doing what we do and getting to go where we get to go and see what we get to see, then you should make a doctor's appointment, because there's something wrong. And I have always been blessed, felt blessed to have had the opportunity to be a reporter in this particular time in the nation's history. My really first glimpse of Gerald Ford at work came on the day that Richard Nixon resigned. I had been sent out to Andrews Air Force Base to see Richard Nixon get on Air Force One for the last time, and it was such a surreal thing. He got on, he walked up to the top of the stairs like he always did. He had a big smile on his face, he waved, and then he turned and he went into the airplane, they closed the door, and he flew off, and about 2 hours later, he was no longer the president, and Gerald Ford was. So after my assignment was completed out there, I went back to they told me to go back to the White House. In those days, I was the Pentagon correspondent, and to give Dan Rather a hand. Dan had not asked for help, but I was told to go over and help wherever I could. And so I did. And so we went into the press room there, and President Ford came in to introduce his new press secretary, who was Jerry Tehorst. And everybody knew Jerry. He was a reporter for the Detroit News, and he was an old friend of the president. He was working on a biography of President Ford, I believe, at the time. And Jerry was not a tall guy. He was about this tall, actually. But everybody liked him, and the president came in, and when he introduced Jerry, Peter Lissagore of the Chicago Daily News was sitting out there, and he said, "Mr. President, would you lift him up so we can all see him?" And of course, he just brought down the house. I believe it was the first time in 2 years that I had heard true laughter in that room. It was like there had been a heavy rain, and suddenly the rain stopped. The skies had parted. They were blue again. The whole atmosphere had changed. I will never, ever forget that. And I think of all the things that President Ford did, he really did change the atmosphere. I will also tell you this, that from that moment on, the press corps, and I'm not embarrassed to say it, fell head over heels in love with Gerald Ford. I mean, it was so different. Mind you, we had gone through these years of Watergate and all this turmoil. We wrote down everything he did. And what was so different about it was he was so normal. I remember at one point we actually, and you'll remember this, Steve, we actually did a story about how the president makes his own muffins for breakfast. And it was on the front page of the Washington Post. And we were all just, we just couldn't get over how this man was just so normal. And all of the press accounts were just glowing. Well, 1 month after that, of course, he decided to pardon Richard Nixon. And this was a total shock. And I mean, it really sent, of all, the press corps into total shock. His approval rating at that time was 70%. It quickly went down to 50%. Richard Reeves, who worked for New York Magazine in those days, said among the press corps, his approval rating went from 100% to 0%. He just threw people into a tailspin. We didn't know what to make of it. At the time, I thought it was the worst thing that I'd ever heard of. I came to have a very different point of view about that, as did so many of us who were there at the time. But as the days wore on, the president was just totally irrepressible. I mean, you couldn't not like him. You might not agree with some of his policies. You might have questions about what he might have been doing. But you could not like this man because he was so humble. I remember one time, one of my favorite stories about President Ford, he told me one time, he said, you know, sometimes it was hard for me to believe that I was president. He said it was just a hard thing for me to believe. And he said when he had been a congressman and when he was a Republican leader, he would come up to the White House, and before he left, he would always, people all smoked in those days, including President Ford, who smoked a pipe. And he said before he would leave, he would always go over to, there was a big jar there of White House matches. And, you know, these were matches, and they said the White House on them. And he said he would always just reach in and get a handful of them and stuff them in his pocket. He would take them back up to his office on Capitol Hill, and he would put them out at the receptionist's desk. And he said, you know, when his constituents come in, they just loved it. This was a souvenir they could take home, these matches that said the White House. Well, anyway, he said one day after he became president, he left the Oval Office and was walking back to the residence, and he found himself reaching in a thing to get a big handful of these matches and putting them in. And he said, wait a minute, I live here now. I don't need to do this. But this was Gerald Ford. And to me, this was the thing that endeared him to so many of us. He was also very kind to those of us in the press corps, much kinder than he should have been, I think, on reflection. He was the only president that I've ever been around that we used to actually kid him, and we would tease him. But he was always very careful when he would go out to Colorado, to Vail at Christmas time. He would always arrange his schedule. They allowed the reporters to bring their families out so we could have time, and the Secret Service could have time away from him. And he was very mindful of that. I remember I wrote out there, and I now have to confess it, the first story about the president falling down on his skis. And this, you know, he could ski better than all of us. And he was a terrific athlete, and that was the part that was sometimes missed. But, you know, when you're out there with a camera and the president takes a header, what are you going to do? You got to report that. And but he took it pretty much in stride. But I'll never forget when we got into the campaign in '76, and we were out in Battle Creek. We're in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's where we were. And it was a very routine speech, and he was speaking. It was a whistle-stop thing on a train. And President Ford, as he was getting ready to get back in the train lurched, and he hit his head on the door as he was going back into the train. So it made a picture. So I had to leave the campaign and go into the local station and feed this film in of the president. Well, God watches you when you're doing things like this, and he has his way. He knows how to pay you back. As I was going back out to to catch up with the campaign, I had to take a flight. The press plane had gone on to. And as I was getting onto this commercial airliner, as I was walking in to my seat there, somebody in the back of the plane hollered, "Hey, Bob," and I turned around and I said, "Hey, how are you?" And when I did, I ran directly into the overhead luggage rack and literally saw stars. I mean, it knocked me out for an instant. And after all those stories I'd written about President Ford, I thought, you know, I'm obligated to tell him about this. And so the next time I had the opportunity, I did. He broke out into the biggest laugh, and he said, "By God, I just wish I could have been there to see it." He also saved us from ourselves many times. And Tommy DeFrank out there, who worked for Newsweek at the time, he was part of the press corps, and he'll remember this very well. At the first televised press conference after I became the White House correspondent, and I really hadn't known President Ford all that well up until I'd come to the White House, the first press conference, he actually called me by name out in the audience, And when he did, my mind went completely blank. For some reason, I couldn't think of a question. And I thought, oh my God, they're watching up here in New York, the bosses and everything. I couldn't think of anything else to say, so I said, what's the deal on the Russians? The president knew what was going on here. I may have fooled others, but he didn't. It turned out he had something he wanted to say about some Russian bomber. He gave an answer, and it wound up on the front page the next day of the New York Times, which just tells you that timing is sometimes better than intelligence. But I always appreciated President Ford not embarrassing me there, and he had the best sense of humor about things like that. One time during the campaign, and we were in San Diego, and in those days, the San Diego sports teams had this thing called the San Diego Chicken. I don't know if some of you here will remember this. And it was like these mascots are today. Well, it was a chicken. It was a full thing with a chicken's head on everything. And Jim Norton, who was a reporter for the New York Times, he ran into the San Diego Chicken someplace and bought the San Diego Chicken's costume and paid him $75 for it. I mean, this is true. Tommy was there. He'll remember this. And the next morning, we're standing out on the airport ramp, and Ford is holding a little kind of just an impromptu news conference. There is film of this, and in the background, you can see this chicken walking up. This big chicken. He walked right up to President Ford. The president looked at him. The chicken asked him about egg prices. President Ford died laughing and gave an answer. So those were the things that you always remember about those days. But, as I look back on it, President Ford's time in the White House was short. But he made a lasting impact, not only on the White House, but on American life and the American people, because he restored respect. He gave the nation, when he pardoned Richard Nixon, a chance to catch his breath. And as the years went by, I came to understand, and I knew that he knew at the time he had done this, that this would harm his chances if, in fact, he decided to run for president. But I asked him about this many years later after he left the White House, and I said, do you think the pardon of Nixon was the reason that you were not elected and it did not win that election? And he said, yes. He said, I'm not saying it was the only reason, but I think it was a major factor because it was such a close election. And if you all will remember, had he carried Ohio, which he lost by 13,000 of, I think, 4 million votes, and won one other small state, maybe Delaware or Hawaii, he would have won that presidency. He would have won that race. And so he knew, and I think he knew at the time, that if he did decide to run for president, that this was going to be an enormous challenge for him to overcome. You had to be there in those days to understand the impact of those Watergate years. I mean, the country literally almost came apart, but because we have a strong Constitution, it was held together. President Ford gave America a chance to sort of take a deep breath, regroup, and then go on. Had Nixon, I think, on reflection, been put in the dock, had he gone on trial, I think the nation would have come to a dead stop for about 2 years. We all know how long it takes for these things to play out. There simply was not time for that. The nation had to get itself back together, and I think because of President Ford, he was the right person at the right time, and I think he had of all the modern presidents, perhaps that one act was one of the most significant acts by any president. I will also just close this with this thought, and I've said this, Steve's heard me say this before, Mike has, and Susan has. Of all the public officials that I have covered in more than 50 years as a reporter, Gerald Ford was the nicest one I was ever around or associated with. Gerald Ford was a very good man. Thank you.
Would you like to stand? And can you stay standing? I'll ask some questions.
Okay.
Good. I think I know the answer, but would still like to hear it in your words as others, including those that have sent up similar questions. If there were more Gerald Ford Republicans in the party today, how would the atmosphere in Washington and political discourse throughout the country be different?
Well, we have an entirely different political atmosphere because in those days, people actually had relationships across the aisle. You had liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats, you had moderates in both parties. And it's almost become a cliche to say it, but it was those relationships, those after-hour relationships, that enabled the wheels of government to turn. No legislative body that has lost the ability to compromise is going to accomplish very much. And that's what we have now, a legislative body that remains in constant and perpetual gridlock because there is no ability to compromise. We just seem to have forgotten how to do that. And that's where we are, and that's the way it is, as somebody I used to work for used to say.
What kind of relationship do you think President Ford would have with the press if he were president today?
I think he'd have the same kind of relationship because he was very secure. He was very comfortable with being Gerald Ford. He had been around reporters all of his life. Jack Kennedy had a lot of personal friends in the White House. But Gerald Ford didn't have that kind of a relationship, but as a Republican leader and as a longtime member of the House, he was around reporters every day. He kind of understood what we did, and he assumed that we understood what he did. And so I think he would be very successful. I think he would also be very refreshing. I'm not sure how he would have fit in right now up on Capitol Hill, but I know one thing. I think he knew how Washington worked when it worked. I think so many of the people that are in Washington now, I said to somebody not so long ago, they've forgotten the basics of negotiation. They've forgotten how to negotiate. But the more I thought about it, the more I don't think they ever knew. I think how it used to be and how it used to work. Now it's make a speech and collect some money and get out of town as fast as you can to go raise some more money. And we have a totally different talent pool now that has come to Washington. You know, so many people now just simply don't want to spend their time doing what you have to do in order to get elected, and that is you have to spend at least half and maybe 3/4 of your time raising money, calling people on the phone, begging them for money, and then calling the same people back tomorrow and asking them the same questions. A lot of serious people have decided they don't want to be part of that. And the people who are willing to do that now are the talent pool from which our elected officials are drawn. They're not bad people. Most of them are good people. But it's a different group than was here when I came to Washington and when Gerald Ford came to Washington.
What do you see as the most important differences in the job of a White House correspondent today and during the Ford administration?
Well, you know, we used to, when we'd go on trips with the president, he would actually come back. He'd talk to the press pool. He'd want to talk off the record. He wanted to know what was going on amongst the members of the press. He had a genuine interest and just kind of knowing what the latest gossip was about things. And we had a chance to talk to him and actually question him directly about some of these things. I'm not sure how much news we got out of it, but we got a better understanding. Now, I was talking to Glenn just a while ago, and I said, what is it like covering the White House now? And he said, well, it's like covering a horse from inside the horse. He said, it's dark, and I hope I won't embarrass, he said, and there's only two ways out. But I don't know what that part means, but I like the way it sounds. I know what it means. Okay.
Who, in your estimation, was the best of the presidential spokesmen or press secretaries, and why?
You know, I would probably have to go back to LBJ and George Christian, who I thought was a terrific spokesman. I think, when President Carter was president, Jody Powell was a true advisor. You might not agree with what he said, but you knew it reflected what the president said. There's so many layers now of the public relations bureaucracy that you're never quite sure anymore where any of this stuff is coming from and whose opinion it reflects.
What kind of a job do you think Jay Carney did in his daily briefings, and were you surprised by his resignation?
No, I think he did a good job. I think he was fine. But he was not in charge of communications policy. He was part of a team, and so I don't know, and because I don't cover the White House now, I don't know how much direct access that he actually had.
Much has been written about this administration's relationship with the press, including the pursuit of journalists through legal avenues, such as the Ricin case and others, as well as going after AP phone records. Do you feel this is unprecedented, and why is it happening now?
Well, our whole information, the management of information is now much more sophisticated than it was when I came to Washington. People find this hard to believe, but when I came to Washington in 1969, most members of the House didn't even have press secretaries. They handled their own press relations. Now, the subcommittee chairman of the Committee on Hides and Skins, and in fact, there did used to be such a subcommittee of the Commerce Committee. They all have media coaches. They have these consultants, these gurus, these people managing, giving them all this information, strategy on how to handle information. I think most of that advice is wrong. I think, for example, if you are going to be on Face the Nation, you shouldn't come on Face the Nation unless you have some news, because if you're coming on, and so many of these PR advisors, they'll type out 3 answers and say no matter what they ask, give them one of these 3 answers, But the American people are not dumb. They're not stupid. They know when people are evading the news. They know when people are trying not to answer. No one looks good evading a question. I don't care who they are. They just don't look good doing it. And my favorite guest on Face the Nation over the years was always Sam Nunn, who was a very powerful senator, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and I used to call him sometimes and say, you want to be on Face the Nation Sunday? And he'd say, I really don't have anything to say this week. Well, I took that as a great answer. He was not wasting my time, he's not wasting the viewers' time, and he's also, you knew when he was coming on, he was going to tell you something that was going to advance the story. That's not the vogue in public relations right now, but I still think it's the most effective way that you can handle your information. The fact of the matter is that I don't care how good the PR is, it never trumps bad policy. And I don't care, how bad the policy is, you can't make it better with good public relations. And I mean, just think back to the Nixon administration. You know, Nixon actually accomplished some remarkable things. The opening to China, the arms control agreements that he and Dr. Kissinger worked out with the Soviet Union, those things remain as remarkable achievements. And the bad things he did remain as bad things. So I think sometimes more attention to policy, more attention to finding people and bringing people into the government who know something about something beyond just putting out yard signs. I think that is the successful information campaign, as it were. I think that is the successful public relations policy. Get people into the government who know something and then rely on them.
We take a journey back to Texas, Bob. As a longtime observer of Texas politics, how did the state get from LBJ to Ted Cruz?
Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer that question, but I think part of it is when I was growing up in Texas, there was no such thing as a Republican. I mean, there weren't any, and there hadn't been any since Reconstruction. But there were conservative Democrats, and there were liberal Democrats, and I think you saw that across much of the South. And then after the '64 and civil rights bills were passed, and you'll remember Lyndon Johnson said, "I've lost the South for my party for a generation," and he was right about civil rights, but he was also right about that. And so we saw a whole new situation develop there. I think you're now going to see, maybe not this election, but in the next election, I think that Texas will again be in play, at least in presidential politics, and that is because of the changing demographics. I think the next Democrat who's elected to statewide office in Texas will be Hispanic. But with the population changing as it is, I think you're going to see the politics of Texas change.
The National Defense Award winner, Dave Phillips, wrote about the problems with medical treatment of veterans in 2013. Why did it take so long for the national media to pick up on a story that a financially challenged newspaper in Colorado Springs had a year ago?
Well, why did it come as such a surprise to everybody that all these veterans who were trying to get care at these veterans' hospitals? Are you telling me that of all these people, if this problem is as widespread as we now know that it was, that none of these people were writing letters to their members of Congress? There were inspections, there were reports, and yet it finally just all came to a head, and we can hope that something is finally going to be done about this. But I must say, as I was listening to this wonderful story that you told, these local newspapers are still the backbone of American journalism. And if we ever reach a point in this country where there is not some entity that does what local newspapers do, and your report is local journalism at its finest, if we ever reach a point that there is not some entity still performing that, we will have corruption in this country unlike anything we have ever seen before. I always have the feeling, and I don't know why I feel this way, that somehow the national news is going to take care of itself. But we must have local journalists, independent journalism at the local level, because you simply cannot have a democracy unless people have access to independently gathered information that they can compare to the government's version of events, and then they will decide what ought to be done about it. So, we've seen it from top to bottom here. Great reporting at the national level, at the White House, in this age when it's Information management is more sophisticated than it's ever been. And at the local level, where you see a local reporter who I was very struck when you said, you know, we found out about this and we decided to try to do something about it. That's what journalism is all about. I always remember Bob Woodward, the great Bob Woodward. He said that one time, I was on a panel with him once, and somebody said, you know, what did you and Carl, what was your thinking? What was your agenda? What was your mindset? He said, look, we were just trying to find out what happened. That's what journalism is all about, and that's the sign that ought to be posted over every door in a newsroom. Go find out what happened. That's what you did, and we're all the better for it.
Thank you, Bob. And if I might say, that's what you also do over the many decades you've been in journalism. Bob, just a few more questions and we'll conclude this hour. I am so touched with the many great questions and the responses. Do you put any blame on the current closed environment in the White House on the press? Do reporters accept too many anonymous sources and none responses?
No, I think the press is doing a very good job. I mean, obviously, it's a human enterprise. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But when you look around the world, I ask people, find another country that has access to more information than we do in this country. Find another country that has better newspapers, better news coverage. And I think the United States pretty much comes out pretty good on that. We can always get better. We always have to keep trying. And sometimes it's like you're beating your head against the wall. And the other part is sometimes we're not right. I mean, you know, we're not infallible either. But I'm very proud to be a part of the American press and the role that it's played in this country over the years.
We traditionally finish with a lighter question or two. As I believe a leader of your own band, or certainly a participant in a band which has played at the National Press Club, yes. What do you think about the New Boys band started in Washington by the kids of several White House staffers?
Yeah. I love them. I really don't know much about them, but you know, I think music is such a wonderful thing, and I've had so much fun with it. Our little band got started just because I was being roasted at a spinal bifida benefit, and it's just part of the gag. I wrote this song called TV Anchorman, which was about this guy that worked in a gas station out on I-95, and a news consultant came in to get some gas and thought he had a sincere face and made him an anchorman. And I always tell people it's biographical. And someone said, is that really true? And I said, well, actually, no, but thank you for asking. I think they're great. And I encourage kids. Music is, I encourage people and young people to do what they like to do. And that's what I always tell when I talk to young people. Find something you like to do. Don't worry about being a success. If you like to do it and you get good at it, the success will take care of itself. But you don't want to, and always stretch. Never be afraid to try. What you don't want to do is get to be my age and say, you know, if I'd have just tried this or that back then, it might have worked. Go ahead and try. That's what I tell them, and that's what I say about music.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you. I said at the beginning of the hour that the National Press Club is honored to be the venue for these annual Gerald R. Ford Awards, honoring the best in journalism. And what I heard today personally reinforces that honor. I want to thank Stephen Ford. I'd like to thank Joe and Donna Calvaruso and other members of your respective teams for all the work that you did to put together this wonderful, this inspiring program today. Thank you all. We are adjourned.